Picture this. You're walking through the gilded halls of a European palace, the air thick with the scent of jasmine and rose. You breathe deeply, ready to fill your lungs with the essence of royal magnificence. And then it hits you, that smell. Sweet, cloying perfume, desperately trying to mask something far more human. Your eyes begin to water slightly as the reality behind the fantasy seeps into your consciousness like poison through silk. This is not the sanitized fairy tale of Disney movies or romantic period dramas. This is the authentic world of medieval and Renaissance royalty, where beneath those jeweled crowns and magnificent robes lurked hygiene practices that would make a modern person double over and retch. We're about to uncover 10 horrific royal hygiene habits you didn't know, revealing the true, often disgusting, reality of life at the pinnacle of power. Before we dive into these forgotten stories of discomfort and disease, if you enjoy learning about the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. And please comment below to let us know where you're listening from. 1. The stench of power, unveiling royal neglect. The court of Louis XIV, famously known as the perfumed court, might conjure images of delicate floral notes and refined elegance. However, the truth was far more grotesque. This wasn't a choice for aesthetic pleasure alone. It was a desperate, continuous effort to mask overwhelming, pervasive odors that permeated every corner of royal existence. Imagine living in an environment where the very air you breathed was described as a thick, almost unbreathable soup of competing fragrances mixed with underlying human decay. This profound contradiction, where visual splendor concealed a biological nightmare, was a defining characteristic of royal life. Louis XIV himself, often dubbed the sweetest-smelling king of all, went to extraordinary lengths to combat his own body odor. He commissioned his perfumer to create a new scent for each day of the week, and his shirts were meticulously rinsed with a concoction called aqua angeli. Yet, even these elaborate measures proved insufficient. His mistress, Madame de Montespan, reportedly couldn't take the smell of her royal lover and resorted to using heavy doses of perfume herself. This anecdote underscores the sheer magnitude of the problem. Even the most powerful monarch's personal scent was a source of discomfort for those closest to him. The problem extended far beyond individual body odor. Versailles, the epitome of royal magnificence, was, in reality, a gilded cesspit of unimaginable proportions that stinked like an outhouse. Contemporary accounts described it as an odoriferous cesspool of dead cats, urine, excrement, slaughtered pigs, standing water, and mosquitoes. The philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau, a man accustomed to the urban realities of his time, even complained about the pervasive aroma of stagnant urine at the Palais Royal. This wasn't just a minor inconvenience, it was a fundamental, inescapable aspect of daily life, transforming what should have been a symbol of ultimate refinement into a monument of putrefaction. The constant effort to mask this fundamental stench, turning perfume from a symbol of opulence into a tool of desperate denial, reveals a profound dissonance between the projected image of grandeur and the underlying biological reality. This collective denial, where inhabitants preferred to live in a soup of competing fragrances rather than confront the unmasked reality, speaks to a deeply ingrained psychological coping mechanism. The pervasive stench was not limited to the French court. King Henry VIII, for instance, suffered from an open, festering leg wound that was so putrid it could be smelled 3 rooms away. Imagine the impact of such an odor in the close confines of a royal palace, affecting not just the king but everyone in his vicinity. Similarly, King Charles II of England allowed his flea-bitten spaniels to roam freely in his bedchamber, rendering the entire room very offensive and indeed made the whole court nasty and stinking, according to a 17th century writer. These accounts paint a vivid picture of a world where the visual splendor of royalty often concealed a biological nightmare, where the very definition of cleanliness was shifted from physical washing to the appearance of clean linen and the masking of odors. 2. The infrequent dip, aversion to water. Beyond the perfumed deception, a more shocking truth about royal hygiene lies in their aversion to water itself. Many European royals, particularly from the 17th century onwards, rarely, if ever, fully bathed. This wasn't due to a lack of facilities, but a complex web of flawed medical beliefs, religious doctrines, and social anxieties. Consider Louis XIV, the Sun King, who is famously rumored to have taken only 2 or 3 baths in his entire adult lifetime. These rare immersions were not for personal cleanliness, but were strictly on doctors' orders for specific ailments, such as headaches. The story goes that after one such bath failed to cure his headache, he reportedly never bathed again. This illustrates a tragic regression in hygiene, driven by a medical understanding that actively discouraged what we now consider basic cleanliness. The phenomenon was not isolated. Queen Isabella of Castile is also said to have bathed only twice in her life, once at birth and again before her wedding. While the exact historical veracity of this claim, like similar ones about Elizabeth I, remains debated, it reflects a widespread belief and practice among the elite of the era. King James I of England was similarly notorious. He was said to never bathe, leading to his rooms being lice-filled. His aversion was so pronounced that a court lady complained she got lousy by sitting in a counselor's chamber that James frequented. Even Marie Antoinette, a figure often associated with luxury, reportedly bathed only once a month. This stark contrast with earlier practices is crucial. In medieval Europe, public bathhouses were common and widely used in cities like Prague, Frankfurt, Paris, and Southwark. Bathing was a social event, a place for grooming, medical checks, and relaxation. Medieval physicians actively encouraged bathing for various ailments, including melancholy, an early term for depression. The shift away from these practices represents a profound decline in personal hygiene, a counterintuitive outcome where attempts to stay healthy actually perpetuated disease. The primary driver of this regression was the prevailing medical belief known as the miasma theory. This theory held that diseases were caused by bad air, or miasmas, emanating from decomposing organic matter. The belief was that hot water opened skin pores, allowing these harmful miasmas to enter the body and cause illness. Consequently, a healthy layer of grime was thought to block miasma, making cleanliness, as we understand it, actively dangerous. This flawed scientific understanding, combined with aspects of humoral theory which warned that baths could dangerously stir up humors or overly weaken the body, created a powerful cultural aversion to bathing. Religious asceticism further cemented this anti-hygiene stance. Some zealous Christians viewed washing as an excessive worldly act that encouraged sinful pride, believing that suffering through physical discomfort, including the presence of parasites and persistent itchiness, was a form of spiritual purification. There was even a belief that water was part of the devil's realm, and that the ability to swim was a sign of being in league with him, contributing to a general suspicion of water. The final nail in the coffin for public bathing was the outbreak of diseases like the plague and syphilis in the late 15th century, which led to the closure of many public bathhouses, reinforcing the idea that baths were dangerous places. This period illustrates how seemingly scientific and religious beliefs can actively discourage basic hygiene, leading to a tragic paradox where efforts to maintain health inadvertently fostered disease. 3. The lead mask, Queen Elizabeth I's toxic beauty. The pursuit of an idealized beauty in royal courts often led to horrifying and self-destructive practices, none more chilling than the widespread use of toxic cosmetics. Queen Elizabeth I stands as a prime example of this deadly obsession, her quest for pale perfection turning into a slow, agonizing self-poisoning. Elizabeth I famously used Venetian ceruse, a lead-based skin whitener, as a daily ritual. Her application method was particularly alarming. She would layer it on without removing previous applications, creating what was described as actual layers and geological strata of vanity and poison on her face. Imagine the sheer thickness of this toxic mask, built up day after day, week after week. When she finally did bathe, which was infrequent, months of accumulated cosmetics, sweat, and grime dissolved away, and the lead-based makeup peels off in sheets like paint flaking from old buildings. The smell emanating from this process was a metallic tang of lead, mixed with vinegar-based cosmetics, layered over months-old human secretions, an olfactory assault that could drop a grown man. The insidious nature of lead poisoning meant that the very substance meant to enhance her beauty gradually destroyed her from within. The lead seeped through her skin day after day, year after year, causing severe invisible health problems. Physically, it led to hair loss, necessitating increasingly elaborate wigs to conceal her thinning hair. Her skin, once the canvas for her desired paleness, became gray and puckered, demanding even thicker applications of the toxic makeup to hide the damage. Perhaps most disturbingly, it rotted her teeth, resulting in breath so foul that courtiers learned specific distances for audiences to avoid gagging. The psychological toll was equally devastating. Lead poisoning is known to cause mood swings, memory problems, and erratic behavior, including paranoia, memory loss, and sudden rages. Courtiers, observing their queen's increasingly volatile temper and forgetfulness, attributed these changes to the immense pressures of ruling, never realizing their queen was poisoning herself for pale perfection. This highlights a profound tragedy: the queen's desperate pursuit of a beauty ideal, driven by social status and vanity, became a vicious, self-destructive cycle. The very products meant to enhance her appearance ultimately caused grotesque deformities and mental deterioration, forcing her to apply even more toxic substances in a desperate attempt to conceal the damage, creating a horrific self-perpetuating cycle. Elizabeth was not alone in this dangerous pursuit. The drive for a porcelain white complexion was de rigueur across European courts, a powerful symbol of status that justified these dangerous practices. Other cosmetics of the era also contained highly toxic ingredients, such as arsenic and mercury. These substances, meant to beautify, instead inflicted chronic illness, disfigurement, and mental instability. The psychological impact of living with such a condition, constantly battling the internal and external manifestations of self-poisoning, while maintaining the illusion of regal perfection, adds another layer of horror to these royal lives. The court's collective ignorance of the true cause of the queen's deteriorating health and erratic behavior further underscores the era's limited understanding of the human body and the devastating consequences of unchecked vanity. Having explored the pervasive stench and the dangerous beauty rituals that defined royal existence, we now delve deeper into the unseen horrors that plagued their daily lives. The constant torment of parasites and the agonizing reality of dental decay, revealing that even the most opulent crowns harbored a crawling, putrid secret. 4. The itching crown, royal lice infestations. Beneath the magnificent robes and elaborate coiffures, European royalty often harbored a horrifying secret: pervasive infestations of lice and other parasites. Their opulent chambers, far from being pristine, were often transformed into breeding grounds for vermin, turning their lives into a constant, unseen battle against an invisible, itching enemy. Imagine royal chambers described as horror movie sets, with dark corners thick with insects, furniture that literally moved with writhing masses of lice. This wasn't merely a minor annoyance, it was a constant, pervasive torment that inflicted immense psychological distress, driving individuals to near madness. The historical accounts of King James I provide a vivid illustration of this reality. He was said to never bathe, a habit that directly contributed to his rooms being filled with lice. A court lady, in a telling complaint, recounted how she got lousy by sitting in a counselor's chamber that James frequented. This direct link between infrequent bathing and rampant infestations was a common, if unspoken, reality. Scientific evidence further corroborates the widespread nature of this problem, even at the highest echelons of society. Examination of the mummy of King Ferdinand II of Aragon 1467 to 1496 revealed a double infestation with two different species of lice, Pediculus capitis head louse and P. thyrus pubis pubic louse. The presence of mercury in his hair samples, probably applied as an anti-pediculosis therapy, suggests desperate attempts to combat these relentless parasites. Lice were not just a source of discomfort, they also transmitted diseases, including typhus. The constant physical torment from these parasites created an immense psychological burden. Imagine trying to conduct diplomatic negotiations or maintain royal dignity during state ceremonies while your entire body itches and creatures crawl across your scalp. The court, in a remarkable display of collective denial, would engage in frantic, subtle attempts to scratch while maintaining perfect protocol. This performative aspect of court life meant that maintaining an illusion of dignity was paramount, even at the cost of profound physical discomfort. The court's This reveals a chilling aspect of royal existence, the constant, unseen battle against biological invaders, fought beneath layers of silk and jewels, highlighting the psychological impacts of poor hygiene, which can lead to feelings of shame, embarrassment, and even social isolation. Despite the pervasive nature of the problem, some basic measures were employed. Combs were a common tool for daily hairbrushing and parasite removal. Efforts were also made to deter vermin from bedding by mixing herbs and flowers like basil, chamomile, lavender, and mint into straw. However, these rudimentary efforts were often insufficient against the sheer scale of the problem, leaving royalty and their courts in a perpetual state of discomfort and infestation. 5. The rotten smile, a royal dental nightmare. Beyond the crawling horrors that plagued their bodies, European royalty faced another pervasive and often grotesque reality: severe dental problems. These agonizing conditions were a direct consequence of their luxurious diets, particularly the increasing availability of sugar and the rudimentary understanding of oral hygiene prevalent in their era. Queen Elizabeth I, a monarch known for her love of sweets, provides a stark illustration of this dental nightmare. Her fondness for sugary treats led to her teeth rotting, turning black, and emitting a foul odor. The decay was so severe that she eventually lost so many teeth that people found it difficult to understand her when she spoke. This physical degradation, a direct result of her privileged diet, was a visible and audibly impactful consequence of royal indulgence. The introduction of sugar into the European diet, particularly in the early modern period, proved to be a catalyst for widespread dental decay among the wealthy. Nobles and royalty, with their unchecked access to these new cavity-inducing luxuries, were disproportionately affected. Josephine Bonaparte, for instance, who grew up on a sugar plantation, developed a lifelong habit of chewing raw sugarcane, which resulted in her having completely rotted teeth. This illustrates how luxury, far from guaranteeing health, could become a direct catalyst for physical degradation. In a strange twist of fate, rotting teeth even became a perverse status symbol, signifying one's ability to afford expensive, imported sugar. Bad breath, or halitosis, was another pervasive affliction in royal courts, often a direct consequence of poor dental health. Louis XIV, the Sun King, was famous for his halitosis, a condition his mistress, Madame de Montespan, complained about to no avail. His oral issues were compounded by a palate that had been punctured during a tooth removal, contributing to chronic problems. The social impact of such a condition was significant, as halitosis could act as a barrier in social contact and lead to psychological alterations. In some cultures, bad breath was even considered a legal ground for marital annulment, highlighting its profound effect on personal relationships and courtly etiquette. Oral hygiene practices of the time were rudimentary at best. Royals and commoners alike resorted to toothpicks, sponges soaked in brandy, or rubbing their teeth and gums with cloths covered in herb mixtures. Rinsing with ice water, chewing celery or cider peel, or using bay leaves and musk were also common, if ineffective, attempts to combat foul breath. Some even used tooth powder made of crushed bone, shells, and pumice. It is a striking contrast to note that before sugar became widely available, tooth decay was surprisingly low in medieval Europe. The subsequent surge in dental problems among the wealthy directly correlates with their unchecked consumption of this new luxury. This reveals a hidden cost of royal luxury, the physical and social consequences of unchecked indulgence, where the very symbols of affluence led to grotesque physical and social degradation. 6. The rancid pomade, hair and wig horrors. The elaborate hairstyles and towering wigs that adorned European royalty were, far from being symbols of beauty and sophistication, often grotesque biological nightmares. These fashionable coiffures, laden with animal fats and left unwashed for weeks, became veritable ecosystems of parasites and putrefaction. Imagine the process. Elaborate royal hair and wigs were often coated with rendered animal fat that had been prepared in palace kitchens from bear or ox carcasses. This wasn't a refined cosmetic ingredient, it was thick, rancid grease. The stench emanating from these coiffures was nauseating and defied description, a horrifying blend of fresh animal fat, the smell of rotting meat, unwashed human hair, and the accumulated detritus of previous styling sessions, all warmed by body heat. This created an olfactory assault capable of bringing a person to their knees. But the smell was just the beginning of the horror. This rancid grease acted as a powerful attractant, drawing every insect within miles and creating a writhing ecosystem of fleas, lice, ticks, and various flying insects within the royal coiffure. Imagine the constant, unbearable itching and crawling sensations. Royal women, in a chilling testament to their torment, resorted to inserting silver-tipped scratching tools into their elaborate hairstyles to provide temporary relief. Picture a queen adorned in jewels and silk, attempting to maintain her regal composure during a diplomatic meeting while parasites literally ate away at her scalp, or during religious ceremonies while insects crawled across her forehead and down her neck. These elaborate structures were not temporary adornments. They could take 6 to 8 hours to construct and were often left in place for 2 to 3 weeks. During this prolonged period, the hair underneath would mat and tangle, creating an even more perfect breeding ground for insects and bacteria. The consequences were severe. Some women developed permanent bald patches where the weight and constant insect activity had destroyed their natural hair completely. Others suffered from chronic scalp infections that created open wounds that attracted even more parasites. The popularity of wigs, which surged in the 17th century, was partly driven by the need to conceal baldness caused by syphilis and to manage the rampant lice problems. However, most wigs couldn't be washed, meaning they too became smelly, and the animal fats used to set them going rancid over time. While powdered wigs, common in the 18th century, used flour, chalk, and kaolin, perfumed with lavender and other essences to mask the smell and whiten the wigs, this only superficially addressed the underlying issue. This habit perfectly illustrates the extreme lengths to which royalty went for fashion and status, sacrificing basic hygiene and comfort for appearance. The visual grandeur of powdered wigs and elaborate coiffures concealed a living, crawling ecosystem of parasites and putrid grease, forcing royals to endure constant physical torment for the sake of maintaining a public image. It reveals a profound disconnect between the perceived splendor of royal life and its hidden, disgusting realities, where fashion and status symbols directly facilitated biological horror. From the personal horrors of rotting teeth and crawling wigs, we now expand our gaze to the very spaces where royalty lived, revealing that their magnificent palaces, far from being havens of cleanliness, were often monumental monuments to human waste and biological decay. The stench of power was not just on their bodies, but permeated every gilded corridor and opulent chamber. 7. The palace latrine, public indecency at Versailles. The Palace of Versailles, the very symbol of Louis XIV's absolute power and magnificence, was, in reality, a monumental monument to human waste and biological decay. Despite its reputation for splendor, life at Versailles was often no cleaner than the slum-like conditions found in many European cities of the time. At its peak, over 10,000 royals, aristocrats, government officials, and servants lived within its walls, creating an unprecedented concentration of human waste and biological detritus that defied every natural law of sanitation. The shocking truth was that public urination and defecation were rampant throughout the palace. Women, constrained by voluminous gowns, would simply pull up their skirts up to pee where they stood. Men, equally uninhibited, would urinate off the balustrade in the middle of the royal chapel. Public urination was rather common throughout Western Europe at the time, but at Versailles, the sheer scale of it was unique. The Duc de Saint-Simon, a contemporary observer, even recounted how a princess would urinate on the floor and casually return to company, and how Louis XV's regent would receive visitors while seated on a chamber pot. The sheer volume of human waste meant that it literally drip-fed from the ceiling onto your dining table during state banquets. Imagine the psychological stress of maintaining the fiction that this was the height of civilization and refinement, while human waste contaminated your meals. Even the royal children were not spared from this pervasive filth. They were raised in an environment that was essentially a beautiful cesspit, learning to walk by avoiding puddles of human waste in palace corridors. The palace air was perpetually thick with the stench of 10,000 people's bodily functions, mixed with the odors of rotting food and animal waste. Horace Walpole, a foreign visitor, famously complained about the awful smell that hung over everything at Versailles, including the gardens. Marie Antoinette herself was once hit by human waste thrown from a window, a stark reminder of the pervasive lack of sanitation. The fundamental problem was the lack of proper plumbing and sewage systems. Toilets, cesspools, and drainage systems only became common in the 19th century. At Versailles, there were hardly any toilets for the thousands of inhabitants. Chamber pots were widely used, and their contents were routinely emptied from windows into inner courtyards, further contributing to the pervasive stench. Louis XIV, in a desperate attempt to manage the overwhelming filth, issued a decree in 1715 that feces would be collected from the corridors only once a week. Later, iron barriers were even installed in certain areas to prevent indecency and dirtiness. Even fashion contributed to the problem. Powdered skirts and elaborate gowns dragged through the filth of palace corridors, distributing it throughout the palace as women moved through their daily routines. This normalization of filth, even for royal children, reveals a profound cultural disconnect from modern hygiene and highlights how social status did not equate to cleanliness. The psychological stress of maintaining a facade of refinement amidst such conditions was immense, leading to a profound cognitive dissonance. This normalization of filth, particularly the public nature of waste disposal, fundamentally challenged the idea of royal superiority and ultimately contributed to the psychological foundations of the French Revolution, as common people began to understand that their supposedly superior rulers were actually living like animals in a golden cage made of their own waste. 8. The groom of the stool, intimate service to a stinking king. In the bizarre hierarchy of the royal court, one position stands out as a chilling testament to the perverse intersection of power and degradation: the groom of the stool. This individual, far from being a mere valet, held immense political power precisely because his duties involved managing the king's most private and unsanitary bodily functions. The groom of the stool was, astonishingly, one of the most powerful individuals in the kingdom. This was not due to noble birth or military prowess, but because he had unparalleled access to the king during his most vulnerable and private moments. His duties were profoundly intimate and deeply degrading by modern standards. He was responsible for handling the literal waste of an unwashed monarch who might not have bathed in months, whose clothes haven't been changed in weeks, whose body is riddled with infections and separating sores. Imagine the sheer biological horror of this daily reality. The stench alone would have been overwhelming. It was a putrid combination of fecal matter, infected wounds, unwashed flesh, rancid clothing, and whatever perfumes were being used to mask the overall horror. Yet, the groom was expected to maintain perfect composure, speak when spoken to, offer counsel when asked, and never ever show revulsion or disgust. This required an extraordinary level of emotional suppression and professional detachment, a psychological burden that is almost impossible to comprehend. For instance, King Henry VIII, a monarch whose leg wound could be smelled 3 rooms away, would have presented a particularly challenging and intimately encountered olfactory and visual reality for his groom. Despite the inherent degradation of their tasks, these men developed genuine emotional bonds with the kings they served. This unique proximity to the monarch, coupled with their intimate knowledge of his physical state, transformed them into de facto medical experts by necessity. They learned to predict the king's bodily rhythms, understood which foods caused digestive distress, and were often the first to notice signs of illness or disease. Their observations were not trivial. They could influence the royal diet, schedule important meetings around digestive patterns, and even affect succession planning if the king's health was failing. They knew more about their king's bodies than wives or physicians, a profound accumulation of knowledge derived from the most unsavory of circumstances. The profound paradox of this position is chilling. These individuals held immense political power, derived from the most powerless position imaginable, kneeling in human waste, while the fate of nations was decided above their heads. This illustrates how the structures of royal power could twist human dignity, making the most demeaning tasks a pathway to influence. The groom's role was a direct cause and effect relationship, performing the most intimate and degrading services led to unparalleled access to the monarch, which in turn fostered unique trust and influence, ultimately translating into significant political power. The psychological toll on these individuals, forced to suppress natural revulsion and maintain absolute discretion, was immense. Yet it was precisely these qualities that made them indispensable to the crown. This habit reveals how the pursuit of power, even through literal filth, could become a defining characteristic of royal service, creating a system where degradation was paradoxically linked to elevation. We have journeyed through the personal and palatial horrors of royal hygiene, from perfumed stench to public filth. Now, we turn our attention to the deeper forces that perpetuated these conditions, the prevailing medical ignorance that actively discouraged cleanliness, and the chilling reality that royal charity often became an unwitting vector for disease, leaving a legacy of suffering far beyond the gilded cages of the court. 9. The holy filth, Europe's cultural aversion to soap. The widespread poor hygiene in European royal courts was not merely a passive state of ignorance, it was often an active, culturally and religiously sanctioned practice. In the early modern period, a complex interplay of flawed medical theories and religious dogma led to a profound aversion to soap and frequent bathing, transforming cleanliness into a perceived sin and suffering into a mark of piety. Perhaps the most astonishing manifestation of this aversion was what can only be described as the Spanish Inquisition against soap. In a shocking example of ideological control, merely washing one's face could become evidence of secret Islamic practice, a dangerous accusation in a deeply Catholic nation. The Inquisition, in its relentless pursuit of religious purity, developed sophisticated methods for detecting bathing. They would actively look for homes that used too much water, investigate families whose clothing appeared too clean, and interrogate neighbors and servants about suspicious washing activities. This highlights how deeply ingrained the suspicion of cleanliness was, extending even into the most private aspects of daily life. Queen Isabella of Castile, a figure of immense power and religious fervor, epitomized this cultural bias. Upon hearing of the daily bathing habits of indigenous people in the Americas, she was reportedly horrified and commanded her new subjects to stop this blasphemous bathing practice at once. This act forced clean, healthy indigenous populations to abandon their traditional hygiene in favor of European filth, tragically contributing to the spread of disease in the name of Christian purity. The theological justification for this holy filth was pervasive. Cleanliness was explicitly associated with vanity, which was considered sinful. Conversely, suffering through physical discomfort, including the constant presence of filth, parasites, and the associated itchiness, was viewed as a form of spiritual purification. This created a perverse incentive structure where deliberately making yourself sick became evidence of religious devotion. In a chilling display of competitive piety, nobles and royal courts even competed to see who could go longest without bathing, who could endure the most extreme body odor, who could develop the most impressive array of skin diseases and parasitic infections. This demonstrates that poor hygiene was not just a passive state, but an actively maintained cultural norm, reinforced by both religious authority and flawed medical beliefs. The prevailing medical theories of the time further solidified this aversion. The miasma theory, which posited that diseases were caused by bad air or miasmas emanating from decomposing matter, was widely accepted. Doctors believed that hot water softens the body and distends the pores, making it easier for harmful miasma to enter the body. This belief directly led to royal edicts mandating the closure of public bathhouses in France, 1538, London, 1546, and Spain, 1576, effectively dismantling centuries-old bathing traditions. Similarly, the humoral theory, which held that the body's humors needed to be balanced, suggested that baths could stir up humors or overly weaken the body. This intertwining of flawed medical theories with religious dogma created a system where filth became a sign of piety and status, leading to a perverse social competition in deliberate self-harm and actively enabling disease spread. This was a notable shift from medieval times, where public baths were common and medically encouraged for various ailments. The coercive power of ideology over hygiene, as exemplified by the Spanish Inquisition's role, highlights the extreme, coercive nature of this cultural shift, imposing unhygienic practices as a matter of faith and demonstrating its far-reaching destructive impact. 10. The contaminated charity, disease as a royal gift. The final, and perhaps most chilling aspect of royal hygiene habits, lies in the unintended yet devastating consequences of their medical ignorance and social indifference. Royal charity, intended as an act of benevolence, often became an unwitting vector for spreading disease, from the privileged, diseased court to the vulnerable populace. Consider this shocking anecdote. A countess, in an act she likely believed she was performing a Christian duty, distributed fresh milk to poor, starving families. Unbeknownst to her, and certainly to the desperate recipients, this milk was contaminated with venereal disease, turning her act of kindness into a death sentence disguised as kindness. This charity was, in reality, a vector for spreading infection from the palace to the poorest quarters of the city. This was not an isolated incident. This horrifying pattern repeated across generations, with other nobles similarly donating contaminated food, infected clothing, and diseased livestock to poor communities. The nobility seemed incapable of understanding that their diseases could affect others, or perhaps, more disturbingly, they simply didn't care enough about common people to consider the consequences of their actions. This reveals a profound gap in either knowledge or empathy, or both, highlighting the devastating societal consequences of elite medical ignorance and indifference. This tragic phenomenon was deeply rooted in the broader medical ignorance of the era. Doctors, for instance, did not routinely wash their hands until the mid-1800s. Hospitals were often mocked as disease-producing incubators or houses of death, places where infection was rampant rather than cured. Surgeons would famously go directly from dissecting corpses to delivering babies, tragically spreading puerperal fever and other deadly infections. In such a world, the concept of asymptomatic carriers, or the microscopic transmission of disease, was entirely unknown. The psychological impact on the recipients of this contaminated charity was immense. Imagine families who had praised the Countess's generosity only to watch their children die from diseases contracted through her milk, realizing that their benefactor had killed their loved ones through kindness. This profound moral horror underscores the devastating irony of benevolence, transformed into a vector of unintended catastrophe. While this specific anecdote highlights a historical reality, its underlying principles resonate with later, well-documented public health disasters. For instance, the contaminated blood scandals in the UK from the 1970s to the 1990s saw thousands infected with HIV and hepatitis C from pooled blood products, often sourced from high-risk paid donors due to a lack of understanding of viral transmission and inadequate screening. This modern parallel demonstrates how systemic medical ignorance and oversight, combined with a lack of care for vulnerable populations, can lead to widespread unintended harm, regardless of the era. This final habit powerfully concludes our journey, demonstrating how royal hygiene habits, or rather the profound lack of understanding surrounding them, had far-reaching deadly consequences that extended beyond the palace walls into the general populace, revealing the hidden price of their purity and privilege. We have journeyed through the hidden, often putrid, realities of royal hygiene, peeling back the glittering facade to reveal a world far removed from the romanticized fairy tales. From the pervasive stench that necessitated constant perfumed deception to the agonizing reality of rotten teeth and lice-infested wigs, the daily lives of monarchs and their courts were often defined by discomfort, disease, and a profound disconnect from basic cleanliness. We have seen how medical theories like miasma and humoral beliefs actively discouraged bathing, leading to a tragic regression in hygiene that was further cemented by religious asceticism and the closure of public bathhouses. The pursuit of beauty, as exemplified by Queen Elizabeth I's toxic lead masks, became a self-perpetuating cycle of self-poisoning and grotesque disfigurement. Within the very walls of their magnificent palaces, particularly Versailles, public urination and defecation were normalized, transforming symbols of ultimate power into literal cesspits, where even royal children learned to navigate puddles of human waste. The degrading, yet politically powerful, role of the groom of the stool further underscored the perverse intersection of power and degradation. Finally, we uncovered the chilling reality that royal charity, born of benevolence but steeped in medical ignorance, often became an unwitting vector for spreading disease from the privileged to the vulnerable. These stories challenge our romanticized perceptions of history and power. They remind us that grandeur often rests on foundations of immense human suffering and biological squalor. The fairy tale of clean, beautiful royalty is just that, a fairy tale. The psychological toll on both royals and their servants, forced to maintain an illusion of dignity amid such squalor, was immense. The widespread normalization of conditions that would appall us today speaks volumes about the prevailing cultural norms and the profound impact of flawed scientific and religious beliefs. If these hidden truths shocked and informed you, remember to like this video, subscribe for more deep dives into history's forgotten corners, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your engagement helps us continue to uncover the realities behind the legends.